Hey addicts, welcome to the Fantasy Addiction Network. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Jared Cook, tight end for the New Orleans Saints. And not going to waste any time. Let's get into his fantasy outlook for 2020 by beginning with a retrospective review of what he had done in 2019. So 2019 was an incredibly interesting year for Jared Cook. I don't know that there's really any other way of expressing just how efficient he was on a very small chunk of the pie of the passing game in New Orleans. Finished with only 43 receptions. He had 705 receiving yards and 9 total touchdowns. He did miss 2 games with an ankle sprain, and he finished as the 7th best tight end with 167.5 fantasy points, averaging 12 fantasy points per game, which was 8th best at the position. So, very solid year from Jared Cook. Now, anyone looking at this right away should recognize that touchdowns are obviously the hardest thing to repeat year over year. And although you can expect tight ends to maintain some of the same value in the red zone, and Jared Cook has been a very valuable red zone asset for the majority of his career, it's going to be very hard to project him to do the same red zone work that he did if his passing volume stays as low as it was in 2019. So had a very strong stretch. Started out really slow. Honestly, I think in most leagues, Jared Cook was on the waiver wire by week 5, and then really came on strong finishes from week 5 to week 17. Every single week, he was at least a tight end 1, multiple weeks finishing as a top 3 tight end, a couple weeks finishing in the top 6, and only had one game where he was below 10 points. So from a tight end perspective, that was literally all you ask for if you're not spending up on trying to get an elite tight end. You find a tight end in the later rounds that gets you 10 plus points a week with the ability to score over 20. That is a gold mine, and Jared Cook was honestly and for that reason alone, a league winner for a lot of teams. You know, put up 23 points in the fantasy Super Bowl last year. Jared Cook was on a lot of really good teams in fantasy last year. So why are we hesitant to go back to the well for Jared Cook? Well, as we've already mentioned, finished with a 13.5% target share. And remember, this was a team that outside of Michael Thomas, Ted Ginn really didn't do much last year. Traquan Smith wasn't heavily involved. Alvin Kamara, pretty involved in the passing game, but he was hobbled for a good portion of the year. So to still only pull in a 13.5% target share, they bring in Emmanuel Sanders now. They also drafted Adam Troutman, another tight end. There's not really any reason to expect Jared Cook's volume to go up. His target share will at best remain around the same place. And if you're not expecting a volume increase, all the other metrics that I want to point out obviously are a bit more efficiency related. So if we're expecting there to be regression in the efficiency metric and there's not any expectation for volume to go up, he's going to be a hard fade for me. Last year, he finished with only 4.6 targets per game, which is 19th amongst tight ends. He had a 20.9% touchdown rate, which is number 1 at the tight end position, 16.4 yards per reception, and 10.8 yards per target. Both of those were number 1. He had 2.58 fantasy points per target and a production premium of plus 44.9. All of those led the tight end position. All of those efficiency metrics, again, looking at the career of Jared Cook, expecting him to regress closer to the mean of what he's produced over the course of his career. And he's not exactly a spring chicken either in his 30s. So if efficiency comes down, you bring in Emmanuel Sanders, who is a deep threat, going to take away some of those deep targets. Don't expect him to get as much work in the red zone, especially if Alvin Kamara comes back to his touchdown form. 2019 Alvin Kamara had 6 touchdowns. In 2018, he had 18 touchdowns. So even if he splits the difference and comes back to 12, some of that is going to come at Jared Cook's expense. Michael Thomas probably continues seeing a decent bit of work in the red zone, and Drew Brees was also on a historically high touchdown rate at about 7%, so we could probably expect that to come down slightly as well. All of this signals to me that Jared Cook is not going to come anywhere near the same ceiling that he gave you last year, and his floor, we've already seen, at least looking at last year in those first 4 weeks, was pretty low. So if his efficiency comes down and his floor stays about the same, he's going to just end up being someone that I would pretty much stay away from in all formats. Right now, he only have him projected for 50 receptions and 695 receiving yards. Gives him 6 total touchdowns. That would put him at about 156.4 fantasy points. But again, not really expecting that same week-over-week consistency, and really doesn't give you much more upside beyond this. And honestly, he could hit well below this. Like, I feel like these projections are probably even a bit generous. Expecting about 156 fantasy points, that would be close to averaging about 10 fantasy points per game. But if he does have a couple of multiple touchdown games, you'd have a good percentage of your fantasy points coming from a few games. And I think that's going to end up being the season that you have from Jared Cook, where you're only really happy starting him a couple of weeks, and the rest of it, you're chasing last year's efficiency upside, which is no longer there. So this is a guy I'm staying away from in pretty much all formats. But what say you guys? Hit me up in the comment section below. Let me know what you think of Jared Cook. And hit that subscribe button for more videos like this one. We're going to be getting into the Seahawks next. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.